Welcome to Westchester Jewish Community Services. As a leading agency in providing a comprehensive spectrum of human services, we have been helping people since 1943. We serve all people in Westchester County, regardless of age, income, or ethnicity. We provide a wide variety of essential and dynamic services that make a difference in people's lives. Children, teens, adults, and senior citizens are served by our network of programs located throughout the county. When people come to us for assistance, they become part of the WJCS family. Our highly trained and skilled staff focus on you and your family and are committed to becoming your partner in finding solutions. For more than half a century, we have been connecting people to services that help them overcome mental, physical, or emotional challenges. WJCS is here in your community when you need us.
Welcome to the Ways We Care of Westchester Jewish Community Services. I'm Dale Wang, Director of Community Relations. WJCS is funded by UJA Federation, United Way, government grants, private individuals, foundations, and corporations. Over the last 3 decades, considerable emphasis has been given to the issues of women and girls, to their development, their rights, and their opportunities. Initially, what women sought was what men were perceived to have had: access to success and the ability to draw upon a fraternity of brothers that could help them achieve their goals, mainly for power and status. Today's men often look around and find a confusing and alien landscape. In the workplace, they may find less camaraderie as they share power with women. At home, they are expected to be nurturing and in touch with their feelings, not characteristics they were socialized to expect. Tonight, we are going to look at ways in which several WJCS group services for men and boys allow males to deal with the problems, cope with the issues, or just explore themselves emotionally in the company of others of their gender. To help us look at programs for men and boys at the agency, we have invited Joel Jarrow, who is a CSW and a therapist in the Hartsdale Family Mental Health Clinic. Welcome, Joel.
Thank you.
Dr. Sarah Friedman, who is a WJCS clinician with the Treatment Center for Trauma and Abuse. Welcome again, Sarah. And Dr. Charles Benjamin, who is a member of a WJCS self-help support group for men. Welcome, all of you. Well, I kind of set the stage, but before we talk about your specific programs, can we talk a little bit about the value of groups and services specifically for men? Joel?
Sure. I think in this society, it's not sanctioned for men to open up about their feelings, especially when men get involved in group context outside of, say, the therapy environment. I think most people, from their experiences, will understand that men will talk about very specific issues when they get together, and generally that involves sports and women, for the most part. When you open up the arena, so to speak, for men to go beyond that subject matter, it opens up a whole array of issues for men. I think having group therapy opens up that avenue for them, which is generally not available to them outside that context.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else have?
Yeah, well, what I wanted to pick up on was that the group that I'm part of, which is comprised of men over 30, the group's been running now almost 15 years, so everybody's been aging during this time. One of the expectations is that everybody has had therapy in their background, so that we have, I think, a somewhat unusual group of men who are quite open and looking for this very special opportunity to be able to talk about things, as you said, that men don't usually talk about. Mm-hmm. I think until we had the Subway series, nobody even talked about sports.
But do we have to set separate kinds of opportunities for men to come together to share these kinds of things, or it doesn't happen when women are around?
Well, I think even if you put it developmentally, we know that girls' language develops at a different speed or rate sometimes than boys do. And if you look at certain theories, they say that girls are more likely to naturally seek out sort of women's company and communal. And that's something that, not necessarily, but that research sometimes shows is easier for women. So I think putting men in a group modality that encourages verbal expression and that sort of outreach and communal experience can have enormous value.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What kind of characteristics make this a safe place for men to share their feelings and emotions?
Well, I think from the beginning, the thought is to create a very supportive environment for men, and that's made very clear, at least in terms of my group. And I think that sets a tone where men, once they see that other men are in the same situation as them or in similar situations, they'll begin to open up themselves. So they look at each other as a barometer for their own personal experience, and then it kind of has a springboard effect. But I think oftentimes men will go into a situation such as this, or in everyday life, thinking that the issues that they struggle with, specifically their emotional struggles, are particular to them and them only. Once they see that there's a universal quality to emotional struggle and that it doesn't apply to women only, which is oftentimes the message that are given to men, that men in fact struggle with the same issues that women struggle with, it then again opens up an area for discussion.
Do you think that having groups that are male and female sets up competition or a different dynamic?
I think there are value in both kinds of groups, and I think they both have qualitatively different things to offer. Depends on what the goals are for the specific group.
Okay. Joel, you have put together a group for men, and these are men who are also in individual therapy?
Some.
Yeah.
Some.
Could you talk a little bit about why you set up such a group and what its purpose is?
Well, I set it up basically connecting back to what we talked about in the beginning, that from my experience, there aren't enough opportunities for men to open up about their emotional world in a group context. I think the therapy world specifically is thought of as a world of women, or a world for women. The way it was established, even the original theorists were very much focused on the mother in very specific terms, but also just most of the clientele that were discussed in the literature were women. They were analyzed, they were dissected, etc. You didn't hear a lot about men, and I still think in the mindset of most, it's really something that doesn't apply directly to men. Or if it does, there's a certain taboo associated with it. My feeling was to try to break that taboo a bit and give men an opportunity to discuss what is human. It's not gender-based, it's human. To have weakness, to have vulnerabilities, to have needs, to have wants. So that was my desire, to open up that world a bit in a way that hasn't really been opened up too fully, in my experience.
How difficult was it to attract men to a therapy group?
Actually, it wasn't as difficult as I originally imagined. This was my first attempt at setting up a group like this, and I was a little weary in the beginning because of some of the things I talked about. But men came in for different reasons. Not everyone came in with this strong internal motivation. I'll be very frank about that. Oftentimes, the initial motivation may be external. They may be pushed by a family member, by a spouse in many cases because of difficulties in their marriage. So that was the initial impetus for them to join a group. But once they began, the external motivation began to become less and less a factor in their engaging in the group. And they really began to open up once that became kind of, put to the wayside, so to speak. So initially, there was some external motivation. There was also great publicity set up by WJCS in terms of publicizing it in the community, in terms of local newspapers and newsletters and things like that. So there was quite a bit of interest early on, and I was lucky enough to get it established reasonably quickly.
What kinds of issues are addressed in this type of group?
Issues that are human, as I said earlier, that we all struggle with: relationships, connection, trying to secure love in one's life, trying to deal with lost love, support, all the things that are fundamental, I think, to human beings are fundamental in terms of the needs of most of these men.
Does it also deal with the stresses? And an article that you had given me talked about the expectations of men in society and how career stress and role expectations in a family often cause emotional and stressful situations.
Right, that's a large part of it. That's certainly a large part of it. Things that are gender specific, that are placed upon men, especially in Western society. I think there are different normative expectations once you move out of our society, but certainly in terms of the West, there are very particular expectations that men are expected to uphold, and that certainly is discussed and is, as I said, a large part of the group, but it's not the exclusive focus. I need to emphasize that being human is as important as the man aspect of this, that dealing with one's humanity and one's vulnerability, which again is not often sanctioned outside the context of a group like this, is a primary focus as well.
How would this differ from individual therapy? What are the benefits for someone of working in a group?
The benefits, again, as I said earlier, is that you're able to see that other people, or in this case specifically other men, share similar struggles, and it makes one feel less alone in their particular struggle. Also, I think that in the group context, there's a little bit less intensity than exists in the individual context. For people who have been in individual therapy or who have an awareness of it, there's a lot of pressure involved in those 45 minutes, which is generally the way it's structured. There's a pressure to maintain a dialogue, to go back and forth. And depending on the therapist, silence isn't often encouraged. And if there is a prolonged silence, it can create a lot of discomfort in the dyad between the therapist and the client. In a group, you can engage and disengage at will. And the ability to engage and disengage, I think, creates a sort of comfort zone for men who are not particularly inclined to opening up, because for many men it is a new experience for them to be in this context. So I think it takes some of the pressure off and then allows them to feel more comfortable in a setting like this, and then allows them to open up more fully. Whereas in individual therapy, especially early on, if the pressure is too high, it can really push a man away from therapy, and they won't sustain it.
What kind of goals do you set for your group?
The goals are individualized. It's an open-ended group, so each individual sets a particular goal for themselves. Once they feel they've attained that goal, then it's time to quote-unquote graduate from the group. But each person has their own set of goals. And it connects to what I was saying earlier. Most of them are related to relational issues, vocational, career questions, and socialization issues for certain men that are looking to expand their social network. So we'll set usually between 1 and 3 goals for each individual. We'll monitor it along the way. And we've had people who have successfully reached some or all of their goals and have decided to move on.
How long have you been running this group?
It's a little less than a year at this point.
And can people join it at a certain point?
At any time. That's my belief is that it needs to be kept open-ended. To set up, in my mind, a rigid modular group would be too restrictive in a setting like this. So there has to be a fine line between working on specific goals, working on solutions, but also having an open-ended context to it, which also, in my belief, creates a safety zone for men, but even more importantly, gets men to think beyond the bottom line. Because I think in this society, men are taught to believe in solutions, bottom line results. So if I'm going to perpetuate that in a group, that's going to do a disservice to these men. They need to think outside the box of solutions per se, but think in terms of process. So it has to be a balancing act between process and solution at the same time.
You don't always solve these problems.
No,
right
and they need to
away.
get comfortable with dealing with conflict and conflict resolution, which is, again, not often sanctioned in our society.
Right.
It's bottom line, it's results, especially men that come from the corporate world.
I'd like to turn to Chuck Benjamin, who is also a psychologist, but doesn't take that role in your group. Yours is a self-help group, and has, as you said, it has run for 15 years. What was the impetus to start that group?
I think the two men who started the group really kind of envisioned having topics that would be of import to men. One of the people dropped out very early on. I think his wife didn't want him to commit to another night away from home. And the second man, who was with us for years, had been a social worker and then moved to being a carpenter. So it was an interesting background. And because it's leaderless, the men in the group, are very educated and have interesting backgrounds, but the dynamics keep shifting depending who has a need to want to just talk about something, who shows up on a particular night. Even though we encourage people to make this a high priority, we often don't get the 9 or 10 members, every single time. So that affects the dynamics some. And we evolved away from having a format or expectations. It was kind of just as it evolved, people would come in and say, I need some time tonight, or if nobody said that, we would say, everyone want to go around for 5 or 10 minutes and say what's going on in your life. Also, because the expectation is that people will be in it for years, there's a trust that builds up just by the longevity, that you really are saying to people, look, this is ongoing, and because we know each other so long and so well, it's kind of like you can almost ask, how's your daughter making out in her new college, or how's your wife's job going, or what happened in your job?
Right.
So it keeps shifting in that way.
But nobody actually leads the group. How do you take turns facilitating it?
Not explicitly. There's different personalities, and some people are more likely to say, what's happening with you, or how'd you resolve that thing you brought up last time? But that keeps shifting, and that's one of the interesting things about it, is that each person brings their own slant and their own strengths,
In relation to the kinds of things that Joel was talking about in his group, what types of issues do the men bring up in your discussions?
One of the distinctions I want to make is that because everybody has had therapy, because that's kind of an expectation, it's not unusual for people to have a therapist as well as being part of the group, because we don't really see the group as being therapy. It's very sophisticated, and it's touching on many of the same issues, but often a person will say, well, that's interesting because that's exactly what I'm working on with my therapist, but it comes up incidentally or tangentially. The topics are so broad. I was thinking, particularly over the years, you hear people talking a lot about work and stresses on the job and stresses with their bosses. Then the children in different ages, there's certain problems that come up when you have a 6 or a 9-year-old, and then with teenagers, everybody.
Everyone has problems.
Right, everybody has that problem, right? And then you begin saying, well, now we got to start planning for retirement, and what's that going to be like? And most of the men in the group are married or have been married. A couple are single. Also, we're trying to recruit younger men so that men who come in their 30s or 40s have a slightly different slant. Many of them kind of recall drugs experimentations in their earlier days, something that we didn't get to with the originators. So it keeps shifting.
In one of the articles I was reading, it was talking about how in a group like yours, when there are people at different stages or who come in, there tends to set up a mentoring type of relationship where the members who've been there longer almost teach the others how to share their feelings. Do you get the sense that this happens with your group? Is there a reluctance with the younger ones or newer ones to open up?
I see it only in terms of career advice. There is a real, asking, how do I get into a new field, or what do you think about confronting my boss on this issue, or what if I move to Seattle? Will I be able to start a practice or something like that? So I see it in those terms. Other than that, it's a remarkably open group, and any topic that comes up, as the men are getting older in the group, we're talking about Viagra. It depends. Things that didn't exist and didn't come up 10 years ago.
Right.
Yeah.
And you allow people to, or actively recruit new members for your
but
group,
it's because we want to stay at around 10, so there can be a year or two and there's no opening. Strangely, right now, we could have 2 new members, which is very unusual, but people are retiring, and one physician became, his job moved out to New Jersey, and he's just so busy he can't get there. So we're in an unusual position now of being able to accommodate 2 new members.
Okay, well, maybe somebody watching will give you a call.
That would be nice.
Sarah, you were talking about planning. You're involved with the Treatment Center for Trauma and Abuse. Could you tell a little bit about what you do and what your plans are for therapy groups for men?
First of all, I'm glad you were able to say the name properly. It's a brand new name, and I can't, so I'm glad you said it for me. Formerly known as the Child Sex Abuse Treatment Center. We are a program that deals with all facets of what we call interpersonal violence. That is to say, children who have been sexually abused, adult survivors of sexual abuse. We have programs for domestic violence. We have programs for juvenile sex offenders. We have programs for children identified at risk for becoming sex offenders. So our focus is really on sexual abuse and abuse within the family. So you're going to get a different cross-section from what Joel and Chuck were talking about. It's a very different population.
Mm-hmm.
We are currently, we have historically run groups for male adult survivors of sexual abuse. We're currently starting up another one. Currently about a quarter of the people we see in the program are either boys or men.
Uh-huh. And you gave me a statistic that over, I don't know what population, but 1 in 7 men or boys has been abused over the life period.
What they tend to do is take a normative population, which is just a sample of college students who are seemingly asymptomatic, and they'll ask them about their own history of abuse. And about what we're finding, liberal estimates are about 1 in 7 men have experienced some form of sexual victimization. We actually believe that that's an underestimate because of dovetailing with issues Joel was talking about earlier, is issues of stigma and powerlessness. Men tend to underreport this kind of incidents in their life.
Mm-hmm. So in planning a group for men, what are you hoping to, what kinds of issues do you bring up? What do you hope to attain by doing this?
Well, I think certainly a lot of the things that Joel and Chuck were talking about finding a communal setting. In our experience, as much as all trauma survivors experience profound powerlessness, betrayal, stigmatization, among men it really manifests itself in a different way. It takes on a qualitatively different appearance. We live in a culture where men and masculinity is defined by one's efficacy and power and potency. And the disempowering experience, such as sexual abuse, can really, for a lot of these men, it feels like they've lost their masculinity, their masculine identity, especially if the perpetrator was a man. Then that raises all of the stigma associated with sexual identity, gender identity. So for this population, having a group of other people who have had this, oftentimes they don't know anyone, certainly no other men who have had this happen to them. So I think goal number 1 is really just to put them in a room and realize that they're not the only one, and that other quote-unquote normal people have lived through this kind of experience. And beyond that, the goals depend on, the population and the makeup of the group.
Now, have you run these types of groups previously?
Yeah, we have.
Right. And you are a woman, obviously, running men's groups, unlike our other guests.
Yeah, you noticed. Well, it's funny with this population. I feel a little bit, I'm not sure I should be talking about this, but with this population I think it can take on a slightly different dynamic, which is that in preparing for coming here tonight, I actually asked some of the men that I work with about seeing a woman and what that's like, and seeing a man and what the feeling is. For men who are sexually abused, not all of them, but the majority of them were abused by men. So I think the comfort level with a female therapist becomes very different, because sometimes the more safe people in their history have been women historically. And so I think in this population, though it would certainly, having a male perspective would be beneficial, I think you could argue it either way, because I think being a woman sometimes can be less threatening for this particular group of men.
Mm-hmm. And in your group, what would the goals be in working with the men?
I think it depends on the level of acuity of the men. I mean, this group is being formulated. Certainly what we tend to work on in our groups in general in the treatment center is issues related to the trauma, and often symptomatology related to post-traumatic kinds of stress. trauma and abuse impact not only one's day-to-day life through experiencing things such as intrusive thoughts or flashbacks, it oftentimes can impact one's perception of themselves and one's ability to relate to other people. So this is usually the configuration of experiences and symptoms that we really focus on within our particular team.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so as we sum up, because we're getting down to the last minute or so, if someone were to look at groups for men or programs or services for men and boys, what do you think are the most important issues that they should be considering in pulling a group together?
Well, the group that I'm in, because we sought each other out, is very special in that regard. And I think there are, what happens once we've kind of reached our max, 4 more people show up and say, can't you squeeze me in? And then we'll have times where we say, okay, we've got an opening. And for 6 months, nobody will say they'd like to come in. So that doesn't quite answer your question, but I think we're kind of unique. There aren't a lot of groups, and maybe there even aren't a lot of men.
There aren't a lot of groups,
Right.
yeah.
No.
As a matter of fact, your program is through the Self-Help Clearinghouse, and we have 230 groups, and very few of them are specific to men unless it's a specifically men's issue.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Yeah, I would add that I think that what might be primary is for the clinicians themselves to go beyond their own preconceived notions about what it is to be a man. That applies to both genders, I believe.
Absolutely.
That the whole notion of men are from Mars, women are from Venus, which is very popular in popular culture and pop psychology. We have to get rid of these dichotomies and just emphasize the humanity of both sexes and to open up the doors to men in a more accessible way.
Okay, well, thank you. As a wife and a mother of 2 men, it's enlightening for me to explore these issues from this perspective, so I thank you. And certainly we all need to be aware of how we can better connect and bond with each other. I'd like our viewers, thank you very much all for sharing your advice.
Thank you.
Our viewers should know that in our next segment we'll be talking about a group for boys with ADHD and a group run at our ARCS satellite for gay and bisexual men with HIV. So if you would stay tuned, I hope you'll find it interesting. Welcome back to the Ways We Care of Westchester Jewish Community Services. I'm Dale Wang, Director of Community Relations. WJCS is funded by UJA Federation, United Way, government grants, private individuals, foundations, and corporations. We are talking tonight about services run by WJCS that use group settings to address the needs of men and boys. While the latter part of the 20th century saw an abundance of programs designed for women and girls, there was an underlying assumption that males did not necessarily need separate services. Now, at the dawn of the 21st century, when there is greater equality among the sexes in the workplace, in the home, and even on playing fields, it is time to ensure that both men and women, boys and girls, are afforded opportunities to explore their developmental, social, and educational issues in atmospheres that are best for their needs. In the first segment, we discussed the value of specific groups for men and looked at both a therapeutic and self-help model to see how they promote growth and connections. We will now consider the benefits of groups themselves and look at 2 programs through which individuals with similar issues grapple with common concerns. I'd like to introduce our participants in this half. Dorothy Fox, who is a CSW with the WJCS Mount Vernon Mental Health Clinic. Welcome, Dorothy. Bonnie Marty, who is a mental health clinician at the WJCS program at ARCS, which is AIDS-related community services. Welcome, Bonnie. And Ann Breimer, who is a clinical social worker also at the Mount Vernon Mental Health Clinic. Thank you for joining us, Ann. I wanted, before we get started, to give our viewers a chance to have the phone numbers for the previous segment. We run a therapy group for men in our family mental health clinic in Hartsdale, and that is run by Joel Jarrow. His telephone number is 949-7699, extension 369. If you are interested in the self-help group run by Dr. Charles Benjamin, please call him at 332-9494. And if you are interested in information about the Treatment Center for Trauma and Abuse, you may reach Dr. Sarah Friedman at 949-7699, extension 371. Let's begin our discussion talking about the benefits of group treatment for people with common issues. What is it that makes a group different, and what are its benefits as opposed to individual therapy?
I guess you're looking at me.
I'm looking at you.
What I have found, particularly in working with children, and I suppose it applies to adult males and females as well, is that on a one-to-one relationship, you get a totally different kind of response from an individual. When they're in a group, particularly young boys, you can see why they don't get along at school. You can see what the mother's talking about when she says he doesn't listen, because there are other distractions. With adults, I think what you find is that they'll express themselves differently. They may be a little bit more cautious initially until they get to know the group, and then there's the whole group dynamic itself, which feeds into how a person is socialized to the world. Mm-hmm. And you see that better in a group than you might on a one-to-one.
Mm-hmm. Bonnie, what's your experience with groups?
I think the group, when there is a common interest, especially shared, relaxes the men, in this case, to be able to talk about their individual concerns and conflicts about that common interest, which I'm sure we'll get into a little more later, but that's what I find mostly, is that they're more relaxed. They're more relaxed in the group setting than the individual, and they'll speak up more freely and speak to each other more freely, and sometimes get something from one another that they wouldn't get in the individual setting, because they share a common experience. Of course, that would be a universal trait for any group, but certainly in these specific groups.
Right.
Yeah.
How do you organize a group so that it works? You may have common concerns, people may have common issues, but they may not have what it takes to relate to each other in a group. How do you know that? How do you select people for a group?
Well, there's a screening process that goes on prior to the group. When we create groups within the agency itself, we get referrals from other therapists, but we do meet with the candidates, and you set up certain criteria for the group, and then on the interview, the group leader will know the other people in the group, and to see that this would be a potentially a good match, and that you could go someplace with it. You're not always right, but
we also
that's the
look
goal.
for people who shares similar interests, similar issues, and also with our group, we try to find boys with about the same IQ. And that's
So that they would be able to relate to each other.
Yes.
And how do you set the parameters? Do you usually have time limitations or goals? Are they goal-oriented, or what generally works? Or does it depend upon the issue?
I think it depends upon the issue to a certain degree, but within our group, we have goals for Ann and I run a co-leader group.
Right.
The goals are very clear, and that's the socialization and anger management, because these kids that's their problem. I ran a women's group, and the goals were understanding relationships. So you have to have a focus for the group, and then the group focus becomes, they fit in their goals to the focus. And that's also based on how you screen.
Okay, yeah.
The group that I run specifically is a support group, so it differs a little bit from the other groups that we've been talking about. It's not as deep into therapy as other groups. It's support. It's information that will touch on therapeutic issues and relationships, but it starts out as a support group, and that these people who come to this group, maybe we give them a little bit more leeway as far as accepting them into the group because it's set up for that purpose.
Uh-huh.
And,
Right.
but basically because it's a support group more so than a therapy group, and it differs a little bit.
Right. Let's talk a little bit specifically about the groups that you run. Dorothy and Ann are running a group for boys with ADHD, and maybe could you explain what ADHD is and how these young people come to your program?
Okay, ADHD is a attention deficit hyperactive disorder, and it could be combined, both impulsive and hyperactive. Some kids will have just the hyperactivity, some kids will have just the inattention. What we found that with most of our boys, they're combined. They're both hyperactive, impulsive, and have poor attention. We started this group in Mount Vernon because what we were finding in our caseload was a group of boys with similar issues. They were having problems relating to others ended up fighting, and they felt that violence was the end result in most cases. So Sarah Rosenthal, who started the group with me 3 years ago, we met with Dr. Richard Evans because he had run a similar group at CPP, and he taught us the model that he used. And with our group, it's very structured because most of these ADHD kids need structure in order to function. So the group is divided in sections. We also use a reward approach. So these kids start earning rewards once they step foot into the clinic. There are points given for maintaining self-control in the weight room. Once they get in, we have a snack portion, which during that snack portion, they talk about issues that they have been struggling with maybe for that day or for that week. And we talk about how they handle it and other issues that would come up in relating to others. After the snack, we have an activity portion, which we use to do problem solving, anger management. It could be in the form of role play. It could be a questionnaire. It could be basically discussion. And at the end, we have a wrap-up that the kids get points throughout each section. At the end of the group, the kids are able to take that point and able to pick a prize. And based on the points they earn throughout that group.
So really it's a behavior modification model.
Yes.
And how old are the children in the group?
It's boys for ages 8 to 11, and at this point, I think this time we have almost
we
the
have
whole
too much.
the whole 9 yards. We also try to limit it to 6 kids, and we have 9.
We have a wait list.
8 of whom have started to show, and we do have a waiting list for it. So it gets a little bit crowded and active in the room that we're in, but they seem to be managing, and we're managing them. And the others, which is what a group does, are managed by the others. I mean, the boys will manage the boys, which is also the advantage, is that you have the peer relationship in a positive way.
When you set this group up, you had one set of boys, and some may have gotten older and graduated, and you bring in new ones. How long can someone stay in the group? How do you know when they're ready to move on?
Well, generally their grades get better.
They're able to relate
their
to
mothers
each
are
other
stopping
without
complaining,
fighting.
or they're just totally impossible, and we say finished, because they're not ready for the group. That is a possibility of something that could happen, is that you put the child into the group and it's not working. So they're not graduated, but they will come back in another group. I think at this point, I don't think anyone in this group was in the original group.
No.
And
These are all new members.
Right, and they have come through maybe 2 or 3 groups. The groups meet twice a year for 6 or 8 week
Twice
segments.
a week? Twice a week?
No,
Twice a
2
year.
groups.
Oh, twice a year. I see.
Yes.
For 6 or 8 week segments, depending upon the calendar. We also have, as part of the group, we have a parents support group. And that is meeting now. It used to meet just twice during the course of the group, but it will be meeting throughout the year. And we have invited other parents of other children other than the ones who are in the group
With ADHD.
who have attention deficit disorder to come in so we can give them resources and ways of handling their kids at home. Because generally with ADHD, if they have been medicated, the medication is no longer in their systems at 4 o'clock. Of course, that's when we see them. But
And that's why the structure is so important.
right, right. Without that structure, they would be really off the walls. And we don't serve sugared treats.
Right.
We only serve chips.
Yeah. So some of the issues, the anger management, how do you deal with that? Is it just the behavioral controls, or how does someone learn to manage someone who is impulsive? How do you teach them to
What we've been
manage?
doing with the boys is to teach them how to recognize internal signals. You know, when it's time for them to maybe walk away, or when it's time for them to start calming down, counting to 10 backwards, or self-talk. So we teach them how to listen to signals, and also teach them techniques in which they can calm themselves down, and also to choose their response. You know, some kids, we had kids previously in the past group that would be playing, and if something happened, it would end up in a fight. And as the group progresses, we'll have kids, that same kid will be able to say, okay, it's just a game, and walk away. So the end result is different.
So you see development and you see change from year to year.
Yes.
Do you also see the boys who have been in the group the previous year have a different impact upon the younger ones?
Yes.
Yeah, the boys there, every time we start a new group, we set up a set of group rules and we explain the structure. And some of the boys will start to explain the group rules to others and the structure as well. But at this point, we're going to get the same group rules coming out because we've got the old timers filling them in. But they come up with some pretty good rules, and the rules are open. They can adjust them through the whole group. So the new group, the new people have, depending on what's happening in the room, they may just add a rule to the list, which is, you know, it's posted, and we write them up there so that we remember them. But
And the old members are very supportive to the new members coming in.
Right.
You know, they act as a guide to the newer ones.
yeah, we had a little boy who was in last year in the spring, and then now this year, and he didn't say a word for the first year. And he started in this talking, and I didn't realize he had a speech defect because he never spoke. But defect or not, he's talking in this group.
He felt more
So
comfortable.
the second year he felt more comfortable.
more
He knew
trusted.
the rules, he knew what to do.
Right.
So a lot of it is trust. Do you think there would be a different dynamic if there were girls in the group?
I'm sure.
Well, we just had the issue
Oh, yes.
in this group. We've had 2 sessions of this group, so
There was an issue with relating to girls, and they felt that they were being victimized because they were male, and the girls were getting away with everything because they were female, you know. And the teachers tend to more side with the girls than with the boys, and they felt that it was so unfair. And but there's a lot of issues too. They're also in the stage that probably they're having some feelings towards girls and questioning that also.
especially the older ones.
Yes,
yeah.
Right.
yes.
They claim that the girls chased them, and then they get in trouble, and it was really the girls' fault. So I can imagine what the room would look like if it was a mixed group.
It might be more of a challenge. Bonnie, your group is for gay and bisexual men who are HIV positive.
Yeah.
What prompted the formation of this group for men in particular?
Well, we began the group in early 1996 because at that time, in Westchester County anyways, there were no groups for men. There were open groups, gay men, let's put it that way. There were other open groups. You could walk in and go to a group, anyone could, that was HIV infected. But there were no specific groups for just gay men, and gay and bisexual men is what it opened up for.
Right.
at that time.
Uh-huh. And why was it important to form a group for this particular population? Were there specific issues, specific?
I think as I thought about it more, there were specifically important things for these men to get together because, like everyone who gets their diagnosis the first time, they're in shock, usually a depressive shock. So, number one, the support for that. But they could get that from other groups. But the other issues were specific. They were gay men, they were stigmatized two ways. One with having HIV positive or AIDS, and secondly, they were stigmatized because they were blamed for this epidemic.
Mm-hmm.
So they needed a place that was safe and non-blaming and more comfortable for them to say what was going on in their lives. Many of them came and come to the group for the support because they've lost many friends through the epidemic and family. So support here is often growing to be new friends and maybe some ways new family, because gay men, like gay women, can lose their family when they come out to them and their lifestyle's not accepted.
Mm-hmm.
So often their friends are their family. I just this past in the past 2 weeks, one of our new members, and this is not unusual, men in their middle to late 40s, said he had lost most of his friends to the AIDS epidemic. That particular age group is particularly
Most severely affected. Uh-huh.
And he has a few friends, and of course then he's come now to deal with his newly diagnosed HIV.
Uh-huh. Now, there have been so many developments in the treatment and prospect for people with AIDS. Over the time period, how do you see people reacting to the different opportunities now available, the different outlook for people with HIV?
Well, it's a real roller coaster ride. I mean, an emotional roller coaster. As I said before, when most people are diagnosed, it's a depressive shock. They think they're going to die, even though that's not quite what happens these days. So once they get over that initial shock, then we've seen the treatment change. Very soon after I started this group in '96, there came on the scene the new medications that would really turn this epidemic into a severe chronic disease and illness, as opposed to one that was quite as mortal at that time. So that change is quite dramatic, but people who are newly diagnosed don't know that just yet. So the group really supports that piece of information. So first there's a shock, and then hopefully they'll come to our group or some group and have that group support to say, no, you're not going to die tomorrow. So, maybe you ought to hold on to your job, and this is what happens.
Don't spend all your
People
money,
spend
don't go
all
on
their money.
vacations. That's
Exactly.
right. I mean,
spend all their money.
There were a
and
lot of articles about
turned in
that.
their insurances, spent their money, went into debt, and then lo and behold, with the protease inhibitors, which are the drugs that really have cut into this infection, they got well again, or they didn't die. And that's another shock. I've just prepared. I did my will. I prepared for death. I spent money. I'm ready to go. I've gotten through the grief reaction, the pre-grief reactions. And now I'm going to live. And what am I going to do? So then we have that again. So then it can take months to a year, 2 years to just redefine one's life again.
Mm-hmm.
So then we go through that, and then sometimes the protease inhibitors don't hold. Some people don't take to them. They have adverse effects, or they get sick again.
Mm-hmm.
So now they go back again. So that's why I say it's an emotional roller coaster ride. What folks go through.
Right. Do you feel that the issues for men are different than issues for women, given the same diagnosis?
With this diagnosis? I think yes, I think they're definitely different for men in general. they start out the same, as I said, with the shock and getting over that and getting the proper treatment and having support and restabilizing their life after a while. But then it's different for men. I think in general, how they interact in the world, they're very much curtailed in their sex life. I think so with women also, but of course for men, I think we know that it's more up front there. They're the ones that are more concerned about that. It affects them heavily. Mm-hmm. Their relationships sometimes dissolve. There's the disclosure issues. Should I tell someone new? And with the gay men population too, they've lost a lot of their friends as family maybe, and relationships. So they're single again. Now what do? Do I go out there? Do I tell the person right away? If I do, are they going to run away? That, of course, is a great theme in our groups very often. Mm-hmm. Disclosure and what to do. So it affects, I think it affects everyone, but I think it affects the men in that way. And their social life was one where they were out and they were meeting and they were having quite a bit of sexual contact. Mm-hmm. That was part of their social activity. Now it's changed.
Right, right. Can you just, in 1 minute, describe what the WJCS role at ARCS is, generally, the services?
Okay. The WJCS AIDS Satellite Clinic at ARCS in Elmsford provides mental health counseling to individuals who are diagnosed with the HIV/AIDS, their families. We have individual mental health counseling available, and then we have groups. We have positive moms groups, moms who are positive and who have children of any age. We have the gay and bisexual men's group. We have a general group available through ARCS and a women's group available through ARCS. And also my colleague there also runs a group for loved ones of people who have HIV and AIDS. So we provide all those services and referrals along the line for care and medical care and that
Right.
kind of thing.
Right. Bonnie, if someone wants to get in touch with you, if they are involved with someone with AIDS or they have AIDS, how do they reach you?
Just simply by phone call.
And the phone number is?
Area code 914-785-8293.
Okay.
And we'll get them hooked up either with myself or one of the other groups or some of the other services available for AIDS, HIV people.
Okay. And Dorothy, if someone in Mount Vernon is interested in the ADHD group for boys, they can get on the waiting list by calling
914-668-8938, and I guess you could call, just ask for the operator.
Okay.
Push O.
Okay.
And she'll direct the call.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you for sharing your expert advice and for giving us a little bit of insight into what makes groups for men and boys tick. Thank you for viewing. I hope that if you have any questions, you will follow up and give us a call. And since this is the December show, I wish you all a very happy and healthy holiday season and a Happy New Year.